Before we get into the podcast today, I want to talk about a really cool service that I tried with one of my players called Champs IQ. Kind of confusing because it's spelled different. So it's Champs and then EYE and the letter Q. So Champs IQ compared to Hockey IQ here, the podcast. Really, really cool. You submit 10 minutes of edited game footage. Their expert analysts evaluate the player across more than 15 key performance attributes. You get an overall rating, a projection against NCAA Division I potential, and just real clear actual priorities. So you know exactly what to focus on next and where to put your time. Especially in the summer, there's so much time to figure out what should I be doing. I think Champs IQ is a great way to think about where do I need to put my time? What's the next thing that needs to be knocked down that I can take off in my game? Champs IQ bridges that gap, takes that guesswork out. You get the detailed, specific, accurate assessment. Really, really cool. Recommend it. If you go to their website, www.champsiq, and remember that's EYEQ.com, use the coupon code HockeyIQ, spelled just IQ, Hockey IQ. Use that. 10% comes off your bill on your submission. I recommend it. Did it with my player, had a great experience. Check it out. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring back Jack Hahn. Jack, really excited to jump in today. For all the viewers, Jack's done an awesome job every single year writing the hockey tactics and insert year. We've got 2026 that's recently released. Super excited to dive into kind of what you've been finding. But great resource, great buy for anyone who's looking to synthesize deeper into the tactics. So, Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be back. We haven't spoken in a while, so it's great to catch up with you, Craig.
Yeah, but we should do this more often. Been too long, but I'm really curious. Just some things that you've been getting into lately, because I feel like the ever ongoing cat and mouse game of hockey tactics, technicals, how do we do things better, is always of interest and never ceases to amaze those that pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, hockey it's not an easy sport, but it's a relatively simple sport still for me. And I do see trends and changes year to year, and teams are quick to copy each other once something hits on something that works. Um, but really, like what I'm finding is actually, the structure of the game is what it is, and it's not too different from, let's say, the high school level all the way up to the professional ranks. But it's really how the players navigate inside that structure that's really fascinating, and really, you know, my vision was always like, if you understand the structure really well, then you can see, when players choose to step outside that structure and make different reads, and that's where you really get the richness of the game.
Yeah, I feel like the power play breakout's like a great example of that, where people are constantly stealing different ideas of how do we do this. I remember UC Jokinen used to take his and put it all across the league with whatever his teams and seemed to have success on it, scoring directly off of the rush on the power play. Even with Jim Montgomery and the Blues, I feel like they've had some interesting ones where they've passed back to only pass right back immediately forward. Been some cool evolution into that area as well. I'm curious, as we've seen, maybe start with the special teams, the back and forth, and we've now evolved back into the diamond, which seemed to be the old, like, you don't do this because you lose numbers at the net. I think that would be a curious spot to start.
Yeah, well, yeah. So as you alluded to, I think when I started this series, or when I started diagramming uh, every team's special teams back in around 2023, uh, it seems like a third of the league was playing diamond, and then most of the league was doing something else, mostly like a wedge plus one, triangle plus one. Now it seems like most of the teams are playing a diamond, and when I look at teams now, like, that if you move the puck quickly against a diamond, you're going to have a 2-on-1 at the net. So the really successful penalty kills, they pressure well, and they prevent you from even getting the puck to that spot. So anything that's on the defensive side of the puck, whether it's the penalty kill, whether it's D zone coverage, whether it's a neutral zone forecheck, it's a series of trade-offs, right? So you know, are you looking to be aggressive and prevent the play from getting to your net? Or on the flip side, are you looking to maybe be a little bit more passive and have more layers and have more numbers so that when it does get to your net, you have at least you're neutral, maybe you have an advantage. So, it kind of swings back and forth. We'll probably see teams move away from the diamond progressively as power plays get really smart at exploiting it. But it's just one of those things where like there's only a set number of structures that you can use in a hockey game, and in this year's ebook, I think I spent about 40 pages just illustrating every single special teams and even strength structure I've seen throughout my years in hockey. So it's not an unlimited amount. There's a lot of it, but I think it's more just swinging back and forth depending on what trends exist.
So where are the ones that have really captured your eyes recently, where flashing out and Jack being like, "Oh man, this is really cool, really creative, or just super effective." Because I think back even just with the high school kids that I coach, I'm like, I'm just looking and stealing from a lot of coaches that just do things that are highly effective that cause us issues, and that our team can actually pull off based on our skill set. And it just seems like a lot of people find one thing or a coach does one thing well and just sticks with that forever, and then rarely evolves and changes too much. But I'm always loving the ones that are constantly trying to push the boundaries, kind of like American football, where you're trying something new, you're showing something new that's never been out there.
So one area that I think is for the coaches out there who maybe coach at the high school level or at the minor hockey level that you should maybe investigate a little bit is pushing wingers, especially out of the zone early on the breakout. So the shame is that when you watch an NHL game, you never see the whole ice unless it's a replay angle, and they seldom show those. But now systematically, every single NHL team, when they have the puck on the breakout, they either have one or two forwards cherry picking out of the zone. And this is something that when I was growing up was frowned upon, whether it was, at the highest levels or, I played high school hockey and we basically never did that. We played against one team that was a high school from a native Canadian reserve, and they would systematically push one or two players out, and we thought that was weird, and we thought that was almost kind of like a cheap way to play the game. But if you go to an NHL game or even a major junior game, like every single team now they do that, and I think at the lower levels, we value the fact that players they have close support and we want to complete passes and we want to use the width of the ice, and obviously players are smaller and slower at the lower levels, but it's one part of the game that maybe isn't quite as well understood just because it's not as available to us when we watch the game on TV.
I feel like if you don't actually go to a game, and particularly if you're too low as well, when you're at that game, like you don't get to see the full picture of that because it's so powerful. I remember growing up, like to your point of like you don't ever want to get too disconnected from your defenseman. So the quip was always get low to support the defenseman. Well, from a defenseman standpoint, that's the thing I want the least because now I make a little pass, that pressure is still on me. You're bringing more people into my space where the opposite of pushing out, now we're creating more space. Yeah, it might be a harder pass to make with the stretch pass, but if you have those secondary layers and far side ice being taken up by teammates, there's still great support options. You can come back to the puck even, and just opening up that space alone is a huge benefit, even if you don't get a puck. And I'd rather have a
Well,
battle out there than one that's in our zone.
yeah, and I think maybe for younger players, it's something that you may have to sort of approach a little bit differently or be a little bit more progressive about it, just because if you ask an 8-year-old to push the pace like an NHLer would, like he's never going to get there or she's never going to get there, right? But it's just that's why I think it really helps to just think about principles. And the most basic principle is when you're on defense, you shrink the space, and when you're on offense, you spread the space. So in that light, it makes total sense for teams to, push the pace and push out the zone and fly their wingers. But of course, there's a way to do it that's representative for the level and the age and this and the ability level that you're coaching at. And just to go back to the idea of like, a blind spot is literally what we can't see, right? So I think this part of the game is misunderstood just because we don't see enough of it unless we regularly attend, high level hockey games in person, where obviously we have the whole view. And like my favorite place to watch a game from is up in the press box as high as possible, just because like you don't really have to move your head. You see the whole picture, and if you want to zoom in on something, you can sort of focus on something in particular. But and that part of it is so undervalued. Like recently, I was in Denver for the hockey analytics conference that was there, where they had over 90 NHL staffers who work in R&D and stats and analytics. And I was talking with some of my colleagues over there, and even they don't have regular access to sort of a full ice camera angle. So, even at the NHL level, I think just that perspective is underused. So, never mind at the lower levels.
And it's such a powerful view because like you can almost start to see the patterns. And this kind of comes back to the idea of like knowledge of the game versus knowledge in the game. And while in the game is important and we want to put players in there, also having the proverbial like you get the healthy scratch so you can see the game from a different perspective is super helpful because you start to see the principles of play of why am I doing this? How does this fit into the bigger picture? It almost seems like so slow from higher up, even though it is so unbelievably fast of a game, but it also slows it down mentally of, okay, I do this because of this, and this is how it opens up. So it actually, I find it slows down the game if you're actually watching with intent and understanding when and where and why and the principles behind what's going on in the ice. And the benefit of being so much higher, like when I go to a game, I'd rather either be right on the glass, super low, or quite high in like the first like I like the corners too, but like that first row in the upper bowl where you're over the glass and you get a full clean picture of everything.
Yeah, so I know we have a lot of stuff to talk about in the agenda, but I'll just quickly just wrap up what I'm really interested in these days, and it's not something that I've written about yet. Maybe I'll get to it in the next edition of Hockey Tactics, but it's just the importance of perspective. And we talked about being up top, you see the whole game, great. Being at ice level, you're on the glass, you see the details, and you see where the players are looking, and you sort of understand what their thought process is because you see like what their eyes are looking at. That's great. um Watching the game from a TV angle, well, that's readily accessible and you do see a lot, so that's great. uh as a player, like obviously you're getting taught the game your whole life from a third person perspective, but you have to convert it to your first person perspective, right? And I think that's maybe technologically, maybe that's the next frontier of the game. Like we know about, the VR tools and things like that, but for, the regular coaches or even for high level coaches, your video meeting is still done from a third person perspective, and your players, to effectively sort of implement what you're telling them to do, they still have to mentally convert that third person perspective into their first person perspective when they're executing. So I think just the different perspectives that you can have in a game and how you can communicate information inside of that, I think it's going to be a big deal, because ultimately a lot of these players who maybe struggle to implement things or maybe struggle to understand the game, maybe it's just a function of how like from what perspective they're being taught or from what perspective they're consuming the game right now.
All right, we can go down that rabbit hole another day because yeah, converting from third person to first person is quite the endeavor. I'll just say asking good questions and getting people thinking about how would you do it if you're in that position is helpful. Um, Thinking about this also from like separating factors from AHL to NHL because I've lived up in Cleveland, saw the AHL team. Now I'm in Columbus. I get to see the NHL team a bit, and watching the game and seeing it from the high level and also the high perspective being way up there. I find that like the AHL and NHL are relatively similar, um, mostly in the way of how players are really talented and they all can skate the same speed. But one of the separating factors I noticed was just giving and receiving passes. The NHL was just so much better and smoother on making one play into the next play, less bobbled pucks. Like you really had to play off the pass. And if you couldn't handle that, you were quickly discarded and sent back to the AHL to maybe never see NHL ice again. That's number one. Number two is kind of like the ice awareness. Like players understood where to look a lot better. So, for example, like hitting the trailers, the classic. Like everyone knows you want to get pucks deep, get the defenseman pivoting, playing behind them. But then what space does that open? And just the amount of times that you'd see, okay, that's so obvious from up here. AHL misses it. NHL is automatic. Like it's if it's open, it's hit.
Yeah, so some of the to your point, like the first thing that I like to tell, especially defensemen who want to play at the next level, is like even if you're a stay-at-home defenseman or you're more defensive minded, look at the equivalent players at the NHL level. They're they're all amazing with the puck in the sense that if they get a bad puck, they could corral it really quickly. Like, depending on what fan base you are in, like whether it's a Eric Gudbranson, whether it's an Arbor Xhekaj, whether it's a Ben Sherratt, like those are guys who, first of all, like do not put up very good on ice stats at the NHL level. Second, you look at them and you wouldn't necessarily say that they're very creative or very effective puck movers even. But if you just look at them, whether it's on TV or especially in person, like they're all amazingly capable in terms of giving and receiving a pass, right? And these are the guys who, again, are maybe the most defensive minded, the least offensively effective players in the league. But to get to that level, you have to be amazingly functional. And at the AHL, I think guys beat up the puck a little bit more. Like you see, it's less fluent. And to your second point about reading the game and understanding the game, like one of the Substack newsletters I've really enjoyed recently is called Joy of the People. It's written by Ted Groton, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's a soccer coach who does a lot of sort of um, community-based soccer initiatives out in Minnesota, and he talks a lot about sports as language. So the one thing that's really he makes crystal clear is, body language is language, right? And when you're playing sports with teammates and against opponents, it's basically an ongoing conversation. So that's why like the idea of fluency is so important because, we know that if we have, two students who are studying English as a second language and they have a conversation, it's not going to be nearly as fluent as two native speakers talking, right? The expressions might be different, the pacing, the pronunciation, the grammar, like so it's just a bit of a step up in terms of fluency. So, players are better at communicating with their teammates through movement at the NHL level, but they're also a little bit better at giving false information or misleading with movement related to their opponent. So ultimately, if you watch NHLers and AHLers practice, you're not going to see a ton of difference in terms of, how they skate and what their individual skills are. But once the game starts, it's that fluency or that conversational aspect that really, is noticeable.
I feel like that's a good way to put it, fluency. Like they keep things fluid, keep it moving. It never kind of gets gummed up or stopped with them. Even the good Bransons of the world. I think about Matthias Samuelsson in Buffalo, like stay-at-home defenseman, but still part of the team structure and keeps things moving. And then I like the other piece, which is deception. Like with my high school team, we always call it Deceptive Thursdays in practice. Just like how can we feed that more into the players, especially even on the obvious stuff. Like I remember Roman Yossi once. I think every single obvious play, even in the summer, like he would look off, even if it was like, okay, we know it's all going there, just to get in that habit of having that deception and how do we throw people off. I think that's a big point. I want to make sure to highlight that for the listeners of something that you should be looking at and trying to get into your team is just more deception at all times and how you can go about that. 'Cause it's such a critical piece. Similar from that same Joy of the People newsletter. He's been a great follow on Twitter for many years, and I'm glad he's got the Substack. Thanks, Jack, for making me aware. I'm going to subscribe to that now. One of the things that he'd highlighted once was the 2000, I think it was 22, maybe it was 26. Yeah, it had to be 22 because it had been Messi won it. About data around like working hard. And it was the North American teams, Canada and US, that had run the most in the World Cup. So it was the classic, like, we're going to be really hardworking. But the teams that did the best tended to actually do the opposite, where they ran less. It was kind of like that underloading and more around being deceptive, control of the ball, and being able to increase performance, less so by working harder, running faster, doing more sprints, and more so about that fluency that you mentioned. I'm curious if you've seen the same.
So, I've been following NHL hockey for a long time. I've played hockey at a variety of levels. I've coached hockey at a variety of levels, and the common thread is like when I listen to a coach whose team is not doing well, like I hear a lot about defensive structure, I hear a lot about effort, I hear a lot about forechecking, taking the body, blocking shots. I very, very seldom hear hockey coaches talk about, our team is not playing well, and it's because we're not passing the puck or we're not finding the space. Very rarely. I've heard it a few times, but it's such an underappreciated part of the game, and yet such an important part of the game. And I think if you grow up as a hockey player in an environment where if you're losing, it's because you're not trying hard, or you're not hitting enough, or you're not blocking enough shots, or you're not shutting people down defensively, and you never hear about the importance of weighing your passes correctly, finding the space, then that makes you a worse player. Simple as that. Because again, your blind spot becomes so big. You're so oblivious to the fact that, well, you were defending for the whole shift because on your first touch of the puck, you made a terrible pass and the other team had it and you never got it back. And if you were able to make that play and string together a couple more plays, then you would have been the one on the front foot. So I think it's such a undervalued or underappreciated part of the game. And I wonder if coaches maybe they're just repeating what they've heard their whole lives. But a lot of times like the way to solve the problems that they think are happening is simply to manage the puck and manage the space and use it better. And to go back to the idea of underloading, it's not to work hard physically, it's to avoid having to work hard physically, by keeping the puck and by controlling the space.
So maybe it's just because my vocation is of a financial advisor, but uh, most people in all areas of life, the more you put in, the more you get out. Well, investing is often the opposite. The more you trade and the more you try, the worse you do. So
Mm-hmm.
like for me, this is like super obvious. But I feel like a lot of people to your point, like it's always just like we just got to work harder and we'll get better results. And often, you're moving out of good space. Or like an example from this year at the high school level, like the entire year, I was basically talking about moving to make passing possible. Like a lot of our issues were because we didn't move to spaces early enough. We didn't read it early enough to even make the passing possible where we did have good sport. So like the first half was just an absolute grind to finally get players to do that. And the second half was such a joy because we were going to the right spots. We were having the chances that we didn't get earlier. And it wasn't because we needed to quote unquote like work harder. We just needed to see the space and move into that space rather than block more shots, hit more. It was more so just putting yourself in a great spot where the passes are a little bit easier to make, where the pass is even there to begin with rather than getting stuck on a puck and having to take a hit or really just shovel it up the wall or punt it out. And trying less hard and playing smarter and working smarter was truly the thing that had opened up the game and allowed us to then maybe put in a little more effort and have a little more consistency on F2 harder than that, etc. But it was all started to your point around seeing and finding those spaces that unlocked all the other parts of the game that made us play better rather than we got to work harder.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I can tie this back to the fact that I'm releasing an ebook every year with the updated tactics at the NHL level, because space is not a magical thing that just sort of appears or that some people see and some people don't, right? Like when we talk about Wayne Gretzky, and we almost say that he's got like this magical ability to see the space and find the space, but really what space is the interaction between defensive structure and offensive structure, right? And I put defensive structure first because actually when a team has the puck, it's the opponents that really dictates where the space is by virtue of how they defend, right? So, a few years ago, we would hear about teams like having four players in the rush. or using the weak side D, or again pushing the pace. Like the weak side D is often available on the breakout because the other team generally they don't really defend the weak side D, because the weak side D is actually it's the lowest value play, right? It's somebody who's maybe static or at least not going very fast. It's somebody who's not very far up the ice. It's somebody who's on the weak side of the rink. It's somebody who's in an area where you're not usually looking to pass the puck towards. So that player is usually open. But what happens is, like, if you make a rule that on every time you break out, you have to get the puck to the weak side D, like sometimes that'll help you, but a lot of times what that does is it's just it doesn't advance the puck quick enough against a good defensive structure, right? So that's why it's important to be sort of to cultivate the understanding of space, as opposed to just say like pass the guy who's open the most often. Because a lot of times against a smart defensive team, the guy who's open the most often is the lowest value passing target.
And that's the difference between like making a play and the best play for the situation, or like how do we manufacture things and kind of play with a little more chess.
Yeah, and so again, it's like, to be creative or to see the space and to find the space, it's you have to have a certain level of theoretical understanding, but you also can't stop there, right? You use the theoretical understanding as sort of a jump off point, and that's how the best players do it.
So I want to jump in now to like the Maple Leafs downfall per se and the Habs rising, because I feel like this kind of goes into it where you've got the Leafs were very big into theory. You had yourself, Daryl Belfry, Sheldon Keefe, a lot of others very smart, awesome minds. And it seems like we've gone away from that over the past few years. Meanwhile, the Habs have kind of been rising similar thought processes of what the Leafs used to do with their own style, their own tweaks, and I think the Habs are the team on the most biggest cutting edge right now, with Adam Nicholas, Marty St. Louis, a few other people as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Leafs downfall and the Habs continually rising. And there's no way the Habs don't win a cup in the next 5 years.
Well, a lot of people said that about the Leafs 7 or 8 years ago, but here's the thing, right? So I joined the Maple Leafs in 2017. I left in 2020. But since the time I joined until now, how many playoff series have the Leafs won? They've won two, right? How many playoff series have the Habs won? Zero. So the biggest, and I would say the blindingly obvious problem with the Leafs is, they had a direction and they just didn't stick with it, or they didn't refine it, without completely dismantling the work that they've done before. Like, I look at the way that the Leafs now or are now organizationally, like they're pretty much back to where they were like before when I started, right? And in a sense, like I make this comparison between hockey and politics, but in a lot of democracies, like you would have a government that comes in, and what they would do before anything else is dismantle what the previous administration did. So a lot of times, like, you stagnate as a country because you spend as much time tearing down as you are building up. And this is not a partisan thing. It's just we see this in pretty much every democratic or even non-democratic country. And it just seems to me like, Toronto is just it's a political thing, right? And maybe with the next administration, they're going to spend some more time building things up and getting better players and running it to failure, which is inevitable, and coming back with better players and better processes, and maybe they'll get there in the end. And the thing with Montreal is, like, they're trending well. They have a very nice core of players. They're looking to add, it's very exciting, but how tenacious can they be with their approach, and how can they, face failure without losing heart and losing confidence in what's brought them here? And so ultimately that's the difference maker.
I like the way you put that, facing failure without losing confidence, because you're going to have some step backs. Like I think that might have been part of Donnie Granado's problem in Buffalo's. Like they probably outperformed their actual capabilities, and they didn't really bring in players until after he left, and that's when the thing started to kick around because they started to fill the actual specific needs around that core. And The Habs seem to just be sticking to a process, and the Leafs maybe had a direction that was promising. And to your point, the regime change will alter the trajectory. Um, I always think that most teams would be better off if they just failed one more year before deciding to go up the elevator, rather than now's the time to end um, the turnaround. Let the team dictate it a little bit more. And when you do have that inevitable like step back, stick with it until that breakthrough. I think like Carolina would be an example of like they just seem to continuously get better and better players just a little bit by little bit and just keep building rather than doing a full teardown.
And I think the reason why Montreal is such an exciting team is because they have hope, right? They have potential, they have promise, they have, skill and a certain level of current success. But the hope is that it's going to add up to something much greater. And, the hope phase in Toronto was maybe between 2016 and 2021 when they lost against the Habs, in that opening round playoff series. And it's the same thing with players. Like, if you're a hockey parent and your kid starts skating maybe 4 or 5 years old and you spend a lot of time with him or with her, and they show up at 8 year old and they dominate because they're not necessarily because they're the most talented, but because they spend the most time playing with dad or with mom, you know, in the backyard, and people say that, oh, like she's so talented and he's so good and he's so gifted. And then you get to 12 and then, maybe your kid doesn't grow as much. Other people start catching up. And then you get to 16. It's like, what happened? Like, are you not working hard enough? Like you kind of lost your way. Like you used to score 50 a year. Now you're scoring 15. What's going on? Like the hope fades at some point, and a lot of times like that's where the disappointment or the discouragement sets in. Like, and at 16, depending on how things go, maybe your kid quits, or maybe your kid sticks with it and plays high school hockey and maybe walks onto a junior team, or plays college club hockey or whatever, and maybe has a different trajectory in life. So whatever that we see like at the NHL level, I think there are such great case studies because you can also extrapolate them to individuals.
So at what point do you tear down versus just keep going at it? The old adage of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, trying to get different results. But at the same point, you might be just so close you don't even realize it. A lot of times I feel like you lose to the team that ends up winning the cup in the first round, you're a failure, but you may have pushed them to 7 games.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I mean, I'm going to make an allusion to human biology, but what I'm going to cite is actually incorrect, but it's to paint a picture. But our body regenerates about every 7 years. So on average, every 7 years, like every single cell of our body changes, right? So anything in life is constantly being torn down. Players get old, players decline, players get traded, players get drafted, players get signed. So as a team, like even if you're not tearing down, you're actually continually tearing down, right? And the problem becomes either you tear down too quickly, like you start cutting off limbs, or you never tear down and you age. So one of the examples is Winnipeg. So why is Winnipeg a top 5 team last season and a non-playoff team this season? Well, it's actually, first of all, they lost Nick Ehlers, who's a very good player, certainly. But if you look at the rest of the lineup, they brought back the same people, except they added a couple of even older guys. And now their average age is like 31, which is incredibly old by NHL standards. So the idea of like, do you tear down or do you not tear down? I think it's kind of like a false dichotomy, because regardless of where you are in your cycle, what you should do is you should always be looking to build and to upgrade. Because even if you're, San Jose or you're Calgary, the idea is always like, how can I bring in more players? Because the tear down part is already taken care of for you. And if you double down on that, well, you're going to end up with absolutely nothing. So the idea is like, again, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whether you're a GM, it's like, how do I upgrade? Because you never, the idea of like tanking to get a top pick and come back. Well, the tough part is not the tanking. Tanking is very easy. The tough part is, first of all, getting the elite talent that are hard to get early in the draft, but also getting the next 5 to 7 players who are going to build around your core. So, for Chicago, yes, it's great that they got Connor Bedard, but is Frank Nazar going to be a difference maker? Is Anton Frundell going to be a difference maker? Are their defensive prospects going to pan out? Is Spencer Knight going to be an NHL all-star goalie? Like, yeah, they got Bedard, but the real crux of the issue is like, can they find 6 other guys that are really good? Or for the Sharks, it's like, yeah, Celebrini is having a great season, but like Will Smith is doing well, and Willem Eklund is hitting stride, and I think Igor Chernyshov is an amazing player. Um, Sam Dickinson probably needs some more opportunities, but maybe he can be a good player, so on and so forth, right? Askarov. So again, like it's you don't even need to think about the tear down, because if you're in that part of the cycle, it's going to be decided for you. And what you really should invest time and effort to is like, how do I build this thing back up in a way that makes sense?
I feel like you constantly need to have like the young legs. So take the adult league perspective to this. Like you always need a little bit of new energy, some new players, whether it be just be a new style, whether it be that youthful energy, that just brings an extra element to the team that you may not have, that you're naturally, to your point, downgrading a little bit. There's always the tear down that's happening, whether it be the players getting older, um, skills even. Like you got to make sure we keep up our basic skills because those do get lost as we age, even if we're not like noticing it until it's a little bit too late. But even just like adult league, if we're trying to stay competitive, like we need some of those young legs in there in the room and tearing all of that out and just going old. Well, great doesn't always work that well. It's my concern with the Blue Jackets currently, where we got a lot of good, talented older guys, but they're on the older side. And what does that do with the younger guys, your Kent Johnsons, etc.? But yeah, always need to continuously keep building and adding that youth. I think is a key factor in that as they come through and push up. Even like Matthew Nyes out of the Leafs is something that would be huge. And the years with the Penguins where they kind of won the cups, it was because they had some of those older guys, but they had some random youth injected into their team that provided them that extra little boost to get them over the line rather than just adding old guys the entire way like you saw back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, so Toronto, like I'm personally not the biggest fan of how Matthew Knies plays the game, but he's been productive and he's a good player. Easton Cowan is starting to come to his own. Ben Danford is a defenseman who may be a difference maker. The problem for the Leafs right now is they've only got these guys. Like if they were able to get 3 or 4 more of these players, they'll be fine, right? And so that's really where the challenge is. And I know you want to talk about New Jersey and Sheldon Keefe, and that's the thing. Like I look at New Jersey's core players of Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Luke Hughes, Shimon Nemec, um, so on and so forth. Like they have a decent young core, but it's just, can they upgrade around that core? And if they can, then I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm curious to talk about New Jersey. I love Seamus Casey coming up from the minors. I think that their back end's pretty good. But to your point, it doesn't seem like they have enough density of quality players where it's slowly been stripped away over the last few years where they really don't have enough to make that push to that next level, even with a Jack Hughes and some really, really elite talent there. I'm curious your sense on just like coaching situation. Obviously, there's been management change recently. Keefe's got another 2 years on his contract. That obviously doesn't stop anyone from firing someone, but just curious overall, your 2 cents on New Jersey and what needs to happen there or what has happened.
So I'll share a story with you, a personal anecdote. In training camp in 2019, uh, so like we were all with the Toronto Maple Leafs at the time. Sheldon and I would have been on the Marlies coaching staff. We were at training camp in Newfoundland, and one day Sheldon invites me out to lunch to just to sit down and chat. And we talk about a few things related to the team. And one of the things that I brought up was, I look at these NHL coaches across the league, and it seems like a lot of them are burnt out or stale, right? And you look at a coach, you name it. Back then, Mike Babcock was one of the most highly regarded coaches around the league, and we're like, he would be a better coach and a more effective coach if he took a sabbatical and then came back, right? And this was like a pie in the sky idea that I had that, if Babcock takes a year off and then Sheldon moves up to the Leafs for a year, um, and sort of brings a more possession style play, like it'd be good for everybody because it's obviously a great opportunity for Sheldon. It's a new voice for the players. It's a new way of playing. Babcock gets the break and maybe he comes back refreshed with some new ideas or some better ideas for doing things. Obviously, that never came to pass. And then I think 3 months later, Babcock gets fired, Sheldon gets promoted, and the rest is history kind of thing. But like over the years, it just seems to me like when I look at Sheldon's run in Toronto and now in New Jersey, like now it seems like maybe he needs a sabbatical, and maybe like if Sheldon hears this, like maybe he might take it the wrong way, and we don't really talk that much anymore. But um, honestly, like I look at what New Jersey's doing on the ice, and it's just like there's not that freshness or that excitement or that sort of curiosity that we had back in 2019 or 2020.
I think about it just like keeping the players hooked, keeping that influence high with the players where they're continuously wanting to play for you. And it's something novel. Like I feel like that gets lost, especially if you're the same coach through youth hockey. I think like 2 years is about the max. You want the same coach, and then you kind of want to move on maybe to someone different. Just for your point, like hearing a new voice and the freshness that brings, and the excitement it brings, and how much more energy you put towards your craft. And yeah, I think Cooper in Tampa is an excellent idea of like relatively similar like basis and foundation, but there's constantly new little wrinkles and new exciting things. The ability to just keep players hooked and always engaged, like that you just want to have that engagement in general. That's where it kind of feels like from a very outside perspective. I don't know anyone around New Jersey or Keefe personally, but it just seems like it feels like they're getting stale over there. And who's that next coach that's going to get stale? Who are the ones that are constantly able to evolve? I think blanking on his name right now, but the guy with the Rangers who's with the Penguins forever, like he did a fantastic job of always refreshing the message. Where it may have been like the same thing, it's just said a different way. So it's still stuck with the players, and they were able to continuously
Yeah.
go out there and execute on it. It's
But
just a big
but
difference.
but that's the thing. It's like it's not written in the sky that an NHL coach's shelf life is 2.5 years. It's not, because if you look at John Cooper and Jared Bednar and a few others, it's not that you have a set shelf life necessarily. It's like, how do you use the power of language, whether it is movement or whether it is the spoken word, to create hope and create the idea that we're going for something different and something special, and it's us against the world, and we're getting better, and we're just not like bogged down in the swamp, like trying to keep our heads above the mud. Like we're building something. And I think in Toronto, like when I was there, that was the most exciting part, is thinking like we're charting uncharted territory, and we're building something, and we're different, and we're special. And at a certain point, it just like it seems like they've lost it after my time there, and that's when there's a lot of sort of questioning, or you start tearing things down because you become frustrated and you become disillusioned, and ultimately that leads to poor results.
So I'm curious, what's like next? Where do you think tactics are going next? What's maybe next for Jack? Because this thing is, to your point, never stagnant. If we're not building, we're slowly eroding away. It's the old Tommy Boy reference that there's either growing or dying and no third direction.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. And I think obviously we had a very exciting and memorable Olympics. I think in the next 4 years, which is the next Olympic cycle, I expect teams to start taking 3-on-3 more seriously because of the role that it played this year. My feeling is like North American coaches, especially, we don't think of 3-on-3 as real hockey, just because during the regular season, it's a bit of a sideshow. And then in the playoffs, we don't have that at all, essentially. But at the international level, like 3-on-3 now is going to be a huge difference maker, right? Like a team that has a coherent 3-on-3 tactics or deployment strategy is going to win those games that go to overtime, 1-1 or 2-2 or 3-3 or whatever, right? Like it's going to be a huge difference maker, and it's something that I'm starting to see little glimpses of teams paying attention to that here and there. So I wonder, what different things we're going to see the next 4 years. Like we talk about Montreal, but they seem to have very strong results at 3-on-3 right now with how they deploy their players. Whether it's playing three forwards together, whether it is using sort of what I call the offside trap, which is one guy just being way offside and working off of the space that's being created there. So they're doing some interesting things, and I wonder if that becomes a little bit more generalized across the league because again, during the regular season, 3-on-3 is sort of a sideshow, but actually it does make quite a bit of a difference. And at the Olympic level, it can make all the difference.
And even squeaking out a point here or there could be the difference in the East this year. I'm really curious though of who's going to be the first one to really get the goalie involved, because I feel like really it's a 4 against 3. And how can we get our goalie involved similar to soccer, where it's a common tactic now as we pass back to the goalie and they don't just punt it way up the field. It's actually draw a player in, dish it out, and now we've got number advantage to make that forward progress. I feel like I've seen a few teams here and there, like the KHL. I want to say there's a team or two that were using it. Um, but I just see that as like a huge area of something that someone can try out, and it might get burned every once in a while, but really could lead to a lot of good advantages, and especially how dangerous NHLers are with a 3-on-2.
Yeah, I mean, again, like go back to Montreal in some of the recent overtimes, like I've seen Jakub Dobeš get a little bit too involved, and like he looks like he's completely out of control. But the mental calculus is that so you get to a 3-on-3 overtime in the regular season. If your goalie misplays the puck and you lose the game, first of all, you still get that 1 point, and second of all, like if he makes a good play and you score, it's almost like a 50-50 thing, which you haven't really worsened your odds because you were already in a 50-50 situation. And we've seen teams that are so bad in the shootout that you might as well go for it at 3-on-3 because you're probably going to lose in the shootouts, right? So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that, and even just most teams where if the puck is stalled out in the offensive zone, a lot of the guys will zip it all the way back to their own zone to get a change. So the goalie goes back, gets the puck, the three skaters change, and maybe there's an opportunity for the goalie to stretch it back up. So basically, we're already seeing that. I think it's going to become more of a thing. It's going to become more institutionalized, and we're going to see teams execute it in a more consistent manner. But we're already there, and I think that's the next big frontier in the next 4 years. And again, I think all of it is going to be driven by the fact that the extra point matters in the NHL, but also the Olympic format.
All right. Well, what's next for Jack? Are we getting Hockey Tactics 2027? Same roles as always. I think you're doing work over in Finland. Anything else new?
So I took a sabbatical from team contracts this year. So Finland was the previous season, but I just signed with a European program for the coming season. So I'll be getting back into that. Bit of a different situation. Folks who are in NHL buildings might see me during the course of this upcoming season. It'll be cool to catch up with some people, catch up with some NHL players as well. But again, it'll be on a consultant basis. It doesn't affect any of my work in terms of the ebook or in terms of my Hockey Tactics newsletter. Lots of good stuff there. So, more of the same, but different.
All right. Anything else we should capture before we head out? But I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, for all the listeners out there, please check out Hockey Tactics 2026. Use the affiliate link that Greg is going to share with you so that he also gets a piece of the pie. Otherwise, my Substack is jhanhky.substack.com. if you're kind enough to contribute to the paid version, then you get more content, but there's going to be something there as well if you're just looking to follow along for the free version.
Awesome. Excited, Jack. Again, can't highly recommend Jack's work enough. Hockey Tactics 2026 even's got some new areas that you dive into. So really a lot of things out, a lot of good stuff out there for people to dive into, whether it be your casual fan or hardened coach who's just looking for seeing what's going on in the NHL, or just wants to refresh how you're going about designing drill activities and practice plans. So thanks again, Jack, for coming on. This was awesome.
Thank you, Greg. Take care.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.